Here is the paradox. If you could stand beside one of the earliest members of our species, the most familiar thing about them might be their face, their hands, their curiosity, maybe even the way they watched the world. But one thing would probably surprise many people today. They would not look like the pale cavemen often drawn in old European textbooks. The early humans who lived in Africa almost certainly had dark, melanin-rich skin. That statement can sound modern, political, or loaded, but the biology behind it is not about modern racial labels. It is about sunlight. For most of our evolutionary story, the sun was not just a warm lamp in the sky. It was a powerful environmental force shaping bodies, migrations, health, and survival. The first thing to clear up is that skin color does not fossilize. A skull cannot tell us whether someone had deep brown skin, medium brown skin, or pale skin. Fossils preserve bones and teeth, not pigment. So scientists infer skin color from several lines of evidence: where early humans lived, how strong ultraviolet radiation was in those places, how melanin works, how genes influence pigmentation, and what happened when our ancestors lost most of their body hair. That last part matters more than it first seems. Our distant primate relatives were not naked in the way humans are. Many mammals have light skin underneath dense fur because fur itself blocks much of the sunlight. If your skin is covered by hair, it does not need to carry the full burden of UV protection. But somewhere in the evolution of the genus Homo, our ancestors became much less hairy than other apes. This probably helped them deal with heat. A body with less fur can sweat more efficiently, and sweating is an extraordinary cooling system. It allowed early humans to move, walk, forage, and perhaps later hunt in hot, open landscapes without overheating as easily. But losing body hair created a new problem. The skin was suddenly exposed. In equatorial Africa, exposed skin is not just touched by sunlight. It is bombarded by ultraviolet radiation. UV radiation can damage DNA, it can burn skin, it can place stress on cells. But one of the most important evolutionary issues may have involved something less obvious: folate. Folate is a B vitamin involved in cell division, fertility, sperm production, and healthy development during pregnancy. It is especially important in early embryonic development. Ultraviolet radiation can help break down folate in the body. So for an animal living under intense sunlight with newly exposed skin, protecting folate was not a small detail. It could affect reproduction. And in evolution, traits that influence reproduction are powerful. This is where melanin comes in. Melanin is the pigment that gives skin, hair, and eyes much of their color. But it is not just paint. In the skin, melanin acts like a biological shield. Darker, eumelanin-rich skin absorbs and scatters ultraviolet radiation before it can cause as much damage deeper in the tissue. It is not perfect armor, and people with dark skin can still get sun damage, but it is a major protective adaptation. So when early members of Homo were living in high UV environments after losing much of their body hair, natural selection favored darker skin. Not because dark skin was somehow primitive in a cultural sense. Not because skin color says anything about intelligence or worth. Simply because darker skin was useful where sunlight was intense. And this is the first twist. The earliest dark skin was probably not the original human skin in the sense of going all the way back to our fur-covered ancestors. It likely evolved after our lineage became more hairless. A chimpanzee under its fur can have relatively light skin. A hair-covered ancient ape may not have needed dark skin. The need became urgent when the body became exposed. In other words, dark human skin was an adaptation to nakedness under the tropical sun. Now, there is another side to the story. Because sunlight is not only dangerous, it is also necessary. When ultraviolet B radiation reaches the skin, it helps the body produce vitamin D. Vitamin D is important for bones, immune function, and many other processes. Too little vitamin D can cause serious problems, including weak bones. So the skin has to solve a difficult problem. Block enough UV to protect folate and tissues, but allow enough UVB to make vitamin D. Near the equator, this balance favors dark skin. The sun is strong enough that even heavily pigmented skin can usually allow enough UVB for vitamin D production, especially in people living outdoors. But in northern regions, the equation changes. Winters are longer. The sun sits lower in the sky. UVB is weaker and sometimes nearly absent for part of the year. Under those conditions, very dark skin can reduce vitamin D production too much, especially if diet does not supply enough vitamin D. That is why lighter skin evolved later in some populations that moved away from the tropics. It was not a step forward. It was not a universal improvement. It was a local adaptation to weaker sunlight. This point matters because people often talk about skin color as if it were a ladder, with one shade somehow more advanced than another. Evolution is not a ladder. It is a set of trade-offs. A trait that helps in one environment can be harmful or unnecessary in another. Dark skin is highly adaptive under strong UV. Lighter skin can be adaptive under weak UV. Neither is better in all places. Think of it like clothing. A thick coat is not superior to a linen shirt. It depends whether you are standing in snow or under a desert sun. Skin color evolved under the same kind of logic, except the clothing was built into the body over thousands of generations. The map of human skin color broadly follows the map of ultraviolet radiation. Populations with long ancestry near the equator tend to have darker skin. Populations with long ancestry at higher latitudes often have lighter skin. And between those extremes, there are many shades, because the world is not divided into two zones. There are mountains, deserts, coasts, forests, diets, migrations, clothing, and culture. Human skin color is a gradient, not a set of boxes. This is why modern racial categories are so poor at describing biology. They cut continuous variation into crude labels. They pretend that a few visible traits define deep, separate human types. But pigmentation is only one small part of human variation, and it changed repeatedly as people moved, mixed, adapted, and invented new ways of living. There is another common misconception. If humans evolved in Africa, did everyone outside Africa quickly become light-skinned? No. Human migration was not a single march from dark skin to pale skin. It was messy. Groups moved in different directions at different times. Some stayed in high UV regions. Some lived near coasts and ate vitamin D-rich foods. Some later developed farming diets with less vitamin D. Some wore more clothing, reducing UV exposure. The same biological pressure could produce different outcomes depending on diet, latitude, culture, and gene flow. Even in Europe, pale skin was not necessarily as ancient as people often assume. Ancient DNA has shown that some early European hunter-gatherers carried combinations of traits that do not fit modern stereotypes neatly. Some populations had darker pigmentation than many Europeans today. Later migrations and selection changed the picture. So when old illustrations show prehistoric Europeans as simply pale versions of modern people wearing animal skins, that is often more imagination than evidence. At the center of the story is a tiny pigment doing a huge job. Melanin helped protect folate in skin in places where the sun was fierce. Reduced melanin helped people make vitamin D in places where sunlight was scarce. Our ancestors did not choose these traits. No group woke up and decided to become darker or lighter. Across generations, bodies that matched local conditions slightly better tended to leave more descendants. And because humans kept moving, the story kept changing. When people invented clothing, built shelters, farmed, migrated, traded, conquered, mixed, and married across distances, they moved genes into new environments. Culture did not stop biology. It became part of the environment biology responded to. That is one reason skin color is so fascinating. It sits at the meeting point of nature and history. It is shaped by sunlight, but also by food, clothing, migration, and social life. It is ancient, but it is not frozen. It is biological, but it has been given social meanings that biology itself does not support. So were our ancestors black? If by our ancestors we mean the early Homo sapiens who evolved in Africa, then they were very likely dark-skinned, because dark pigmentation was the best protection under intense African UV. If we go farther back, to more fur-covered ape-like ancestors, the answer becomes less simple. They may not have had dark exposed skin because their hair provided protection. And if we look at later humans after migrations out of Africa, skin tones diversified as populations adapted to different environments. The careful answer is more interesting than the simple one. Humans did not begin as a collection of modern races. We began as one African species whose bodies carried adaptations to the world around them. Dark skin was one of those adaptations. Later, as some of our ancestors moved into regions with less UV, lighter skin evolved in some lineages as a different adaptation to a different problem. The irony is that one of the traits people have used most often to divide humanity is actually evidence of our shared story. Every shade of human skin comes from the same evolutionary balancing act. Protect what sunlight can destroy, and capture what sunlight can give. Skin color is not a ranking. It is not a border between kinds of humans. It is a record of geography written in pigment, a memory of migrations written on the body, and a reminder that before humans drew lines between each other, the sun had already left its signature on us all.
Thanks for watching! If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. See you in the next one!